A very good evening and a warm welcome to one and all present today. I am CA Prachi Singh and I'm going to be the host and the moderator for today's session. I'm very excited to be here and thank you for taking out time. Do you recall this saying that auditor is considered a watchdog and not a bloodhound? Well, with the changing times and the frauds like Satyam, ILFS, Yes Bank, Bhushan Steel, and so on, it triggers a debate around the role of auditors. And hence, today's topic is around role of CAs in fraud investigation. So sit back and take as much as you can, as we've lined up some very prominent speakers and they're very experienced in the field of forensics, risk management, internal audit, and so on. Let me first invite CA Harsh Kumar Mittal, Chairman, Faridabad branch, to welcome you all. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Prachi. Respected Chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, ICI, CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji. Vice Chairman, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji. Speakers for the day, CA Shailesh Kaushik and CA Vishwanath Kochi ji. My teammates in the Managing Committee of Faridabad branch, technical and support team of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, my friends, viewers across the country, a very good evening to all of you. I, CA Harsh Kumar Mittal, Chairman of Faridabad branch of NIRC of ICAI, welcomes you all in today's webinar on the topic, the role of Chartered Accountant in fraud investigation, which will be taken by our renowned speakers. It's been our privilege to host this webinar, and I would like to thank CA CS Nanda sir for giving us opportunity to host this webinar on the topic, which is very relevant and useful for chartered accountants. I think with increase in NPA and frauds in banks, there are many opportunities for chartered accountants for assignment of fraud investigation, forensic audit. But one should also keep in mind that there are so many challenges also to perform and complete these assignments. Our both speakers will enlighten us about the opportunity in fraud investigation, as well as what are the challenges while doing these fraud investigation assignments. I once again welcome you all. And I also request Prachi Singh, the moderator of the session, to proceed further. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And it's my now honor to now invite CA Charanjot Singh Nanda, Chairman, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, ICAI. He's a Central Council member and holds Chairman position for Internal Audit Standard Board, Committee on Information Technology, SAPA, Research Committee, and a few others. I'm sure you would have attended at least one of his talks, if not around accounting, auditing, then maybe one on the life lessons. Thank you, sir, for taking out time, and we request you to share your words of wisdom.
Thanks a lot, Prachi, for a very wonderful introduction. Sri Harsh Kumar Mittal, the chairman of Faridabad branch, which is the host branch. I can see my very dear friend, Mr. Shailesh Kaushik, and Mr. Vishwanath Kochi, along with the secretary of the board, Amit Gupta, and the support team, and all who have come here to go home on a light note. Ladies and gentlemen, your board is instrumental in having more programs. The reason is to train you. I want to tell you one thing very candidly, that today's topic is a very pertinent topic which speaks of a role of chartered accountants in fraud investigations. And I want to tell you that I made this presentation on this topic some 3 days back before the district judges and investigating officers at NFSU, National Forensic Sciences University campus in Delhi. One of the very pertinent topics which will very detailedly tell you how chartered accountants need to gear themselves to undertake any investigation that may come in way. And with this topic, I'm reminded of a couplet which says, अगर खैरात में मिलती कामयाबी तो हर शख्स कामयाब होता. अगर खैरात में मिलती कामयाबी तो हर शख्स कामयाब होता. फिर कदर ना होती किसी हुनर की और ना ही कोई शख्स लाजवाब होता. If you want to grow high, grow great in your life, if you want to reach unprecedented heights, your technical impetus coupled with your communication skills will always mark a great difference. Ladies and gentlemen, technology has today empowered us to undertake what we intend to do, and your board, the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, which is the first in the entire globe, in the entire universe, in the entire world to come out with 23 forensic standards, which have changed the face of forensic accounting. Yes, your institute is the first to come out with guidance on remote auditing way back on 30th March 2020 amongst all constituent IFEC member countries. I want to tell you that your board is very keenly pursuing a dream project of technology for non-technology chartered accountants. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that technology will attract you and put you at a very dream sought area wherein you can always pursue your greener and sophisticated pastures which you have always dreamt of. Investigation and chartered accountants both move hand in hand. And for that, we have Mr. Kaushik and Mr. Kochi. I will not take much of your time. I compliment you all for coming here and being here. And more importantly, I want to thank the Faridabad branch and its chairman, C. Harsh Mittal, for hosting this program. And I want to compliment and congratulate all of you who have come here to attend this program. There is a couplet which says, Manzil mil hi jayegi, thoda bhatakkar hi sahi. Manzil mil hi jayegi, thoda bhatakkar hi sahi. Gumrah to wo hain jo gharon se nikle hi nahi. People who have come here to listen to this program are enlightened people who would always move up on the ladder of professionalism. So my great kudos to you, and over to Madam Prachi Singh, the moderator of this program, to take this program forward. Thanks all for giving me this opportunity. We all are there to serve you. The board is there, and individually you can always give a call to me, a write to me, put a WhatsApp to me. We are very keen to give you our best. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I always love the energy, and I'm sure the audience echoes the same thought. So let's move on. Now we are going to begin with our first topic, which is opportunities in fraud investigation by CAs. And I'm going to now invite CA Shailesh Kaushik. He has over 20 years of experience in petroleum, IT consulting, auditing, and accounting practice. He has managed global ERP implementation for Fortune 50 clients. He's a certified information system auditor, and I'm sure the audience has a lot to learn from you. Hence, I'm not taking too much time and handing over the baton to you, sir.
Thank you. Just give me a minute so that I can share my screen. I'm audible?
Yes, sir.
Very much, Mr. Kaushik, very much.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to listen to Nandaji. In fact, just this morning, I was giving a shikayat to Amit. Last दो बार इन्होंने शायरी नहीं की. तो आज दो शेर बोल के मेरी एकदम I have got a very good start. So thank you so much.
मैंने कंपलसेट कर दिया साहब. कौशिक साहब जो बचा था मैंने कहा पूरा कर दूं.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming.
And such a pleasure to be here. And I think it's a topic which interests me. Definitely, I'm sure all of you who have come would also be interested. Opportunities per se are perpetually growing. So I will introduce you with a slide which talks about our opportunities. You can see the numbers.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Now, this is a rough progression of the world's economy from, let us say, the beginning of 0 AD till today. And it presents a beautiful picture of how we have changed. At the turn of this century, we were number one. We maintained reasonably from 16 to 16%. We halved till 1820. Then we dropped like anything. China across 2000 years has been very steady. Europe has doubled. One of the things we can see as to why these changes have happened the primary changes have been that if you look at everything for 1600 years, things virtually remained the same. 103 billion went to 329 billion, 3 times. 329 in about 400 years became 10 times. And if we look at the last 20 years, we have grown by almost 60,000. So to understand this with forensic investigation, we need to understand where the progress is going. The progress is going because primarily the industrial revolution took place in Europe. So a lot of manufacturing came into the picture. And the growth where we have grown substantially has happened in the last 20 years in terms of volume. As per the latest survey, we are 5th in the global GDP. And this is because of the advent of services, which is where India has picked up now to come 5th. Manufacturing, China has always been good, but we're catching up. So when we look at a forensic investigation, the opportunities are definitely reflected in the growth of industry as a whole. We as chartered accountants, or we as investigators, or we as forensic professionals can only grow if the industry grows. And the first part is, with that growth, there is phenomenal opportunity for us. And this growth is only expected to continue. Now let's come to another concept of the company. You can see some slides. These relate to the industrial growth between 1600 to 1800 in terms of till the beginning of the 19th century. We invented automobiles, flights, cameras, electricity, steam engines, telephones, spinning wheels, which changed the way we live. And all these inventions are there till today. You still have Edison's company, Bell's company, or Ford's company in existence. So I do this in the beginning of anything to do with forensic investigation is companies are not a bad thing. Promoters are not bad people. Entrepreneurs are not bad people. When we do an investigation, look at the exceptions. For example, if I did the investigation of a automobile company, we'd like to see how much they've spent in their core area. Are they doing enough towards reducing pollution of their vehicles? Are they looking at alternative fuels? Are they looking at new markets? Are they looking at expanding their footprint? That's what I would look at. How are they spending their money? If they're doing it right, we don't have an issue. So now let's come to the next part of this, which is concepts. We'll start with 2 concepts. All of us are familiar. One is called accounts, and the second is called audit. So before we get into I will talk a little about what is forensics and what is investigation for about 45 minutes. Then we will freely talk and take questions related to opportunities. So accounts means to render explanation for expenditure. And usually it relates to when you spend someone else's money. I mean, the earliest you can think of is when we were young and got pocket money, or we got money to go to the market and buy something. We'd come back and explain to either of our parents what we bought and what's the balance. Our first audit used to be our parents verifying where we went, what did we bought, and did we bring back the correct change. So that was our first, at least my first facing of an auditor. And nothing has changed from my childhood days. Instead of taking from parents, people take from banks, people take from shareholders, people take from relatives for their business. And the audit is about looking at whether these funds were utilized correctly for the purpose for which they were given. So nothing much has changed, but it's good to always go back with the basics of what the subject we're doing is about. The second thing is, when we do a forensic investigation, we generally talk about fraud. Now, fraud is about wrongful gain and wrongful loss. So there are a couple of things here. A mistake is not a fraud, even if it causes a loss. So to be called a fraud, we need about six things to happen. Somebody should lose money. Somebody should gain money. Property or goods should change hands, or cash should change hands. A person should get what he's not entitled to do. And if you look at section 126 of the IPC, a person has to do this with an intent to defraud. So anything done by mistake doesn't come in the category of fraud. So just recap. Someone must gain, someone must lose, property should change hands, goods can change hands, or money can change hands, currency. A person should gain this even though he's not legally entitled to it, and someone else must lose it by someone intently doing a fraud. So this is where an investigation comes. The investigation will tell us what somebody lost, who gained, how did it happen, how was the whole thing perpetrated, what is the evidence, and things like that. So that's what we're talking about in a forensic investigation. The next important concept is something called mens rea, which means in the mind. It's about intent. And this is possibly the hardest thing to prove. And this is a skill area we need to develop as chartered accountants. For example, I could do a mistake or make a mistake while preparing a balance sheet. In the balance sheet and P&L, we could capitalize something which is expected to be charged off to revenue. That per se is not a fraud. What is a fraud is when I do that with the intent of defrauding. So if I fudge my numbers so that I can get a loan, if I manipulate numbers so that my shares do better and I make a personal gain at the expense of somebody else, that is what we look to prove as mens rea. Without mens rea, it's no fraud, it's negligence at worst, it's gross negligence at the maximum, which you can prove. If it's done by a professional, you can talk about professional negligence and related disciplinary action, but it can't be proved as fraud unless you can prove the intent to commit the fraud, which is what forensic investigations are all about. The next concept is what we call actus rea, which is also part of our investigation. This is the physical element, to prove the loss, prove the gain, prove the transfer of money, prove the movement of goods, prove that, for example, in this case, that it was not correct to capitalize the amount, it should have gone to revenue. So these this is also an important thing because both the mind and the action have to be proved. But unless you prove the mind, it remains an error. While the opportunities are enormous, we also have skills which a forensic investigator needs. And before we get into the skills, I would like to clarify briefly. There's a lot about forensics which people think is to do with fraud. But forensics has a lot of positive work. For example, and when I talk about the positives of forensics, I will also discuss opportunities, mergers and acquisitions. When we do an investigation into whether a company is appropriate to buy or not, forensic skills are equally important. There may not be a fraud, but you can give satisfaction to the person who is looking at the company as a prospect, whether it would be a wise decision, whether the numbers actually reflect the state of the company, whether the books are reliable, whether the transactional records maintained are reliable, and things like that. The other area where forensics comes into being is when there's some kind of disaster, there's fire, there's a server crash, and people lose their data. Forensics is a wonderful area to rebuild your accounts, look at external sources, come back to see how the accounts can be brought back, look at suppliers, look at backup tapes, look at physical documents, look at what vendors' balances look like, look at balances of related companies, and rebuild the accounts. Another area which is positive where forensics has a lot of opportunity is in actuarials and the insurance sector for those who are comfortable with insurance-related work. It's a natural stepping stone. So while we generally talk about investigation, please definitely be aware that forensics is an area where positive work also happens a lot. In fact, the origin of forensics came from the medical profession, which is very, very advanced with this. But even in medicine, use in murder or theft investigations is one part of forensics. A lot of medical forensics is about research into cures, into postmortem of diseases and seeing what could have been done better, review of care. So forensics necessarily doesn't have a negative outcome. There are positive things to do as well. Now let's see, what do we need by way of skills for a forensic investigator? Two parts are there. What are we doing? We're following the asset trail. We're following the money trail. We're looking at assisting agencies. Could be the CBI, could be the police, could be state police, economic enforcement wing, banks, resolution professionals, SFIO. You also could assist promoters. Now that's a little unusual, but I've done it a couple of times, and it is a huge opportunity. While promoters may not pay you to investigate frauds they are committing, they would definitely pay you in case they are suspecting that there's a fraud in their company which is taking their money away. So if the promoter finds that his cost of purchase is high compared to competitors, that he's not winning deals which he used to win before, or if they're not making the kind of margins they used to make, these are kinds of cases where we have been called to see whether this is naturally business going down or whether something is going on which they should know. And quite a few times we've come up with not just that there is a fraud, but we've also come up with wrong business practices, control issues, manipulation. Shall we say, rather than misinterpretation is strong, convenient interpretation of law, regulation, or practices, and to use them in a way that favors you rather than looking at what is ethically and morally right. So for the money trail, for the transaction trail, there are multiple courses DAB is doing. For example, the FAFD, which is the Forensic Accounting and Fraud Detection course. There is webinars like this, which they do. There are specific courses on forensic related tools like CAT, IDEA, ACL, Tableau for data visualization and presentation. A lot of these courses are covered by DAB, so that the process of investigation, the tools and skills are available with you. We will come to the standards which Nandaji referred in his inaugural address. Like he said, we are the first global body to bring about comprehensive standards on forensic accounting and investigation. So while the opportunities are there, we also need to develop the skills, we need to develop the competence, and we need to develop a reputation so that the work doesn't go outside of our domain. And while little bit of this is into Mr. Vishwanath's department, we should be aware that we're not the only ones trying to get and make the most of these opportunities. There are IT professionals, there are our related institutes, including cost accountants and company secretaries. There are other professionals who are very good at data analysis and visualization. There are core IT people who can write programs to do and investigate a lot of these things. So while the opportunities are plenty, there are also much competition. And to be able to give or offer a bigger value than the competition is very important in order to be able to avail the opportunities which are there. And we will talk about how to get some of these opportunities. The next part is, even if you get one opportunity out of these, let's take the most simple example of an investigation. Most of you, I guess, have worked with banks, and a lot of our work comes from banks, where someone has taken a loan, they don't repay it, and the banks are not sure whether the business has gone bad, whether the money has been either diverted or siphoned, or whether it's just a plain business loss. Now, if we are going to say that the money was, the difference between, again, fraud, even if you are able to discover diversion, if you are able to discover and establish siphoning, it's possible that the defense of the promoters would be, we didn't know, somebody else did it, we were not aware, and things like that. So we need to establish the involvement and the intent. So first is that there were controls, since it is the role of the promoter to ensure adequate controls. There were either lack of control or breach of controls. There was collusion. In the collusion, can we establish acceptable evidence to prove the involvement of the promoter in the fraudulent business process? Can we quantify losses and damages? Are we able to identify at whose instance were there incorrect accounting procedures followed? Who advised the malpractice? Then again, find out where the disappeared assets went. Did they go to a related company? Did they go to a relative of the promoter? Where were the funds used? Find out what structure of parties were there. If we are able to do this in the opportunities we get, more opportunities are bound to follow. But if in the opportunities we get, we are unable to provide credible evidence, either supporting that there's a fraud or establishing that there is no fraud, this is the business, these were the competitors, this is what happened, these were the changes in raw material prices, this is what happened to the finished goods market, this is what happened with the machinery, that's why this company didn't do well. So both ways, we need to provide acceptable evidence. I mean, the key I have seen, it is no different in this practice than in any other practice. When you get the opportunity, if we do well and get the word of mouth, the opportunities continue to grow. This being a virtual session, I'm not able to look at your feedback or get questions. So I will draw upon the kind of questions we do when we meet a physical audience. For example, in the first one I did, for multiple reasons beyond control, we didn't do a good job. Does that mean I will never get? There again, you need to establish why you could not accomplish what was desired. You need to give acceptable evidence that data was not available to you, that whatever you required to complete a competent investigation was not given to you. What were the constraints? What were the limitations? The person in front is reasonable and unbiased, I'm sure they will not hold that against you. And there are always other opportunities to pursue. Like I've told you, I've given the example of loans. Then there are IBC companies, which is companies which go to NCLT, where they are put up for other people to come and buy. There's a resolution professional who is appointed to take charge of the company. They mostly appoint a forensic professional to look at the accounts, comment on possibilities of fraud, validate the assets, see if they exist, check where the money has gone, is there a money trail? And all this helps not only the resolution professional, but the investors take a considered decision on the way forward and how much they're willing. Sometimes it also gets into how much they're willing to pay for this company after reading the forensic investigation report, to figure out how many of the assets are real, how much is fictitious, what is the real worth of this company. So there are multiple kinds of opportunities. Then, like I said, there are opportunities from promoters. There are opportunities in M&A. There are opportunities in reconstruction. There are opportunities in validating the accounts for any third party. So even if one assignment doesn't go your way or doesn't go right, you can always look for other assignments. So there's a huge opportunity here. So don't worry about if one did not go the way you wanted, we will discuss later on in the program about what are the other kinds of things you can do. And if there is a method for the moderator to receive questions, you can please put them, and I will take them all up towards the end, because any session on opportunities, in my view, requires a lot of participation. So if you've had things you faced, or you have specific questions on how to convert opportunities, and or what difficulties you face in converting, realizing, or looking at what opportunities are available in the field, please feel free to write. And I'm sure the moderator or somebody from the technical team will be able to give that to me so that we can take them up. And don't wait till the end of the session. If you have questions, please keep putting them. Whenever there's a logical break, I will take them and answer them. So what do we need? It's good to know, have some legal background in terms of business and economic laws. For example, if you're doing investigations in foreign exchange, you should have an idea of foreign exchange. If you're dealing with companies with international dealings, you should know international markets, international pricing. You should be in a position to understand transfer pricing if there are lots of related and connected companies. You should be able to do a risk analysis to understand where that business faces its challenges, whether it has sufficient controls and procedures to be able to combat those challenges. And just a second. Yeah, that is one. I can't see my chat window. Yeah, I can.
So there are a couple of questions, if you would want to take them now.
Yeah, you can just put them in the chat window. I was able to find
Sure.
the chat window. I was having difficulty wondering where it is. But now that I've found it, you can put them there. Thank you, ma'am. So you put them there at the relevant place. I will definitely take them up.
Sure.
All right. The other part, which is a natural transition, is income tax. There are also opportunities from income tax or GST with respect to investigation, recovery, and things like that, where they involve members of the profession in trying to figure out whether what's been provided in the return is right or wrong. So that is one part. And those are the kinds of things we need. And now taking up a little of what Mr. Nanda had talked about in his initial address, what the Institute has done is to try and bring about, we are not going to go through the standards in detail, but it's important to see the focus of the standards while, and it'll give you a very good idea of the opportunities. So first they cover a preface, a framework and basic principles. Then they talk about what are the types of assignments, what are the risks we look at from a fraud perspective, what is a hypothesis. Hypothesis is essential to any investigation. You start with a working premise, look at the evidence and what you find, see if your hypothesis works. If it doesn't work, change it. If it doesn't work at all, make a new one. Understand how you will draft your engagement objectives. What is the kind of acceptance or mandate letter you should do? When we should go and engage an expert? How do we engage with agencies? Is there anything new if I work with EOW, if I work with SFIO, if I work with the police. So those are related to the engagement. Then this is a kind of work which is very confidential. So we don't want the people being investigated to know what we're doing. So how do we communicate? Because when you're given an engagement, communicating with the people, the principal stakeholders, those who are monitoring and managing your engagement. So these are the areas where we need to be careful when we get opportunities. There's a 300 series which talks about how you execute. Then there is what we call specialized areas. Which we talk about how you apply data analysis, what are the nuances with related to discovery of evidence. There's a specialized section on loans and borrowings. How do we report? How do you maintain quality? And things like that. And if you look at the first three, they basically tell you what you need to do and what you need to have. We will cover a little of that. We have a question from one of the attendees, and it's a very good one. The Companies Act punishes intended fraud. So even if there's no actual gain or loss, the Companies Act actually says that if we are able to prevent you in the act of doing a fraud, it's equivalent to your having committed the fraud. And that's the legal perspective. Actual fraud is when the transaction has happened, somebody has lost, somebody has gained. Let's take the example of a public issue. There are misstatements in both the future estimates as well as the kinds of numbers for the past. Now, before the company actually goes public, after the numbers have been submitted to everybody, if something comes out, that is what I would classify as an intended fraud. When we discover it after the event, it's an actual fraud. There's a supplementary part of the question. For intended frauds, do irregularities, compliance need to be reported? Now, a fraud investigation is not a regular audit. If you come back to this slide, the engagement objectives need to be clearly defined between us and who is appointing us. Once we have that clarity, I don't think there is going to be a question on what is in scope and what is out of scope. So generally in fraud investigations, whether they filed the GST return in time, whether the income tax was given late or not filed at all, is incidental. That is incidental. But what is much more important is, do those have an impact on your investigation? Are different figures reported to different authorities? That gives you clues into your financial investigation. So those are the kinds of things you need to do. But The other question talks about what is Benford's law and how do you use it to identify fraud? Now, that again is a question of the how, but I will give you a brief answer. Benford's law is basically credited to Benford, but it was started by a gentleman called Newcomb, who actually found that all of you hopefully are comfortable with logarithm books. So Benford's law is based on logarithms. So what Benford's law does, or what Newcomb actually found out, is that the earlier pages of a logarithm book are used far more than the later pages. He found this very curious, and as an academic pursuit, we had gone forward. What Newcomb did is try to understand why the first numbers are more important. So then what Newcomb came up with was, if you look at these things randomly, it is not that the digits are equally distributed in any set of numbers. What actually happens is that you have each digit occurring at a different frequency. And this frequency, for example, it's about 30% of the numbers will be 1. There's a different percentage for each of the other 10 digits as first digits. So when you look at a large amount of accounts receivable or a large number of accounts payable, when you run this Benford program through this, it will tell you as how many of the numbers do not fit with Benford. So then what you get a clue is, if the numbers were random, this is how it would have been. So there is a suspicion that there was a natural sequence was broken and someone has added numbers. The logic behind this is when we add numbers, we have our own preferences. An 8,500, a 1 crore something. So the Benford's law catches these kinds of things. And it's acceptable. So if you trace back to the original vouchers, you're bound to find something in terms of that this number or this transaction is not okay. Now, there are a couple of questions related to how can I get assignments and other things. We will come to them at the end. There's also chain of custody. Now, these are all related to execution and they're not related to the opportunity, but they are important in the sense that it relates to our credibility. So chain of custody is, let me say, it's a very complex matter. In our country, court cases take time. And as chartered accountants, for us, the last step is a forensic investigation. I mean, somebody makes the accounts, somebody has a doubt, there's an auditor who comes, there's an internal auditor, there's an external auditor, there's a statutory auditor, there are income tax, there's GST, all these people to whom you submit compliances. When you're not comfortable, or either the lender or the owner or the shareholder or the government is not still comfortable, they appoint a forensic investigation. So in our world, that is the last step. But in the real world, it's the first step. Based on your forensic investigation, the people may or may not file an FIR. After the FIR, the agency conducts its own investigation. Then they decide whether or not this is worth going to court. Then, once you get to court, you need to file a charge sheet. Once the charge sheet is done, the hearings happen. Once the hearings happen, there's defense, there's prosecution, there is cross-examination. And in good times, this takes 2 years. In normal times, it can take more. If you're unlucky, it goes 8 to 10 years. So the chain of custody means maintaining the purity of evidence throughout the judicial proceeding. You should be able to prove at every time of cross-examination that the evidence was not tampered with, that the evidence was got legitimately, permission of data owners, permission of the relevant people was taken, it was not tampered, this is exactly how it was when you took it. Those things are chain of custody. Now, how to do that? There are lots of techniques which are taught in the FAFD course. So you can do the course and that will give you most of the hows. All right. Reporting results, very important. We'll do a slide on that maybe. And quality control. So the preface of this standard is very important from our point of view to relate to the opportunities, because this tells the people who are appointing us what standard they can expect. It indicates the quality of what the users will get when they come to availing our services. It also sets the expectations for regulators. From our side, it kind of tells us as chartered accountants and forensic professionals on how we are supposed to structure our approach, how we get about understanding the basics, engagement objectives, execution, specialized areas, reporting, quality, and everything else you saw on the previous slide. So this is by way of guidance to us. In addition to this, it is overarching on our code of ethics, which is common to all of us. And there was a question on court proceedings. The primary objective, the minute you use the word forensic, it's about how this thing is proved in a court of law. Forensic comes from the word forum, which means to prove in a forum. So if it is anticipated that a matter will end up in litigation, then the forensic investigation is called for. The standard also covers attributes. This is similar to what we have for everything: independence, integrity, professional care, confidentiality, and the skills and competence we spoke about. The next part is what is called conduct. This is much more interesting in terms of skill, because this is unique. Contextualization of the situation. I can give you multiple examples that we jump to conclusions without understanding the environment. It happens to me also, even though I've done several of these. Because when something is unusual, immediately we form opinions. Let's take an example. A company has huge stocks. And if the average stock during the year is X, at a particular time it is 10X. So definitely unusual, definitely what I call a red flag. But before making an opinion, we need to contextualize this situation. 10 months into COVID, almost every company had excess stock. Some are seasonal companies. Woolens, for example. Consumer goods and Diwali, for example. Air conditioners in summer, for example. Heaters in winter, for example. So the fact that it's unusual may not necessarily mean that it's wrong. People do stock up for Diwali sales. People do stock up for Amazon Big Day sales. People do stock up for Flipkart related sales. People do stock for festival buying. So the fact that something is unusual, definitely look at it, but also understand the circumstances. Then we talk of something called the primacy of truth. The primacy of truth is, as investigators, we have to maintain the primacy of truth. which means, let's say I'm appointed by a bank. There's a lot of pressure on me. It's convenient that the borrower, for everybody, is guilty. But if the evidence doesn't show that the borrower is guilty, even if it means antagonizing the bank, primacy of truth will prevail. That is what it means. Sometimes the truth is inconvenient, but that is what we need to project. The third part is about respecting rights and obligations. Even if you are dealing with a fraudster, they too have rights. You cannot steal data from their laptop. You cannot incorrectly obtain bank statements from them. You cannot obtain anything illegally. That would upset the chain of custody we talked about earlier. They have a right not to cooperate with you. But if you have enough ground for suspicion, you can definitely ask whoever has appointed you to give you police, EOW, CBI kind of help so that they can get the information you need. But as chartered accountants, we do not infringe on the rights and obligations of individuals. Even if you get the police or others into the picture, they have a procedure. Most of you, I think, deal with income tax. Even search and seizure has a procedure. Even collection of documents has a procedure. Separating facts from opinions. This is a common mistake which we all make. Because when we get into forensics, everybody has an opinion. We are in there because there's an opinion. We are called as an investigator because a bank thinks a borrower has siphoned the funds. We are called by a promoter to look at his company because he thinks one of his managers is a fraud. We get into a partnership firm because one of the partners thinks one of the partners is not doing what they should be. Our job is to listen to all the opinions and bring out the facts. Quality and continuous improvement, we don't even need to talk about. We're dealing in terms of, we just saw the slide. In 1500 years, we grew 300 billion as a world GDP. We've grown 60,000 billion in the last 20 years. So that's the amount of the world which is changing. And that's how fast it is changing. We need to adapt. In terms of technology, there's artificial intelligence, there's robotics, there's machine learning, there's the Internet of Things, there's 3D printing, the things we couldn't dream about even 3-4 years ago. So we have to continuously improve, stay up to date, and maintain quality. So that's about what we need to be doing to utilize the opportunities we have. And I think there were a couple of more questions. I will take those up after we do reporting results. Now, this is one of the most important parts where there is pressure on chartered accountants. So I'll spend a couple of minutes on it. And I'm sure if you have further doubts, I will be happy to take the questions. But basically, what the standard tells us is we are an investigating authority. We are not a judge. So when I come to Yes, give me a second. When I come to the conclusive part of the report, we are not here to talk about guilt. We are not here to talk about innocence. We are not here to pass judgment. And sometimes the people who appoint us, the primary stakeholders, may not be happy. So the way to use it is to use language, whether it's English, whichever is the language you use. Let's say I'm investigating a purchase fraud. I can always say average cost was so much. These transactions were at much higher than the average cost. The higher price was approved in the system by such and such person. We were able to establish money trail from the vendors to this person. We were able to establish this much money went out without goods being received in the company. We were able to establish for all these goods, the person who signed the goods receipt note was such and such person. We got a statement from this vendor that they were asked to do this by such and such person. Given this, it is our conclusion that based on the above evidences, we have reason to believe that these transactions are prima facie fraudulent and need to be investigated further. Now, that is one part. And we come to another important part, which is the last line. Sometimes it happens that you don't get documents, you don't get data, and you're not able to complete the investigation for some reason. Even there, it's very important to report closure, to state that this is what happened, this is why we couldn't proceed further, and this is what we've done so far, and this is what we had left to do, and this is why we could not do it. Which means that we can't be held responsible for these things afterwards. So even if there's an incomplete assignment, please complete and do the closure based on what you've done. The next one is to discuss some opportunities. So now I will take some of the questions. We covered Benford law. Somebody has cleared the FAFD exam. Excellent. How can I get assignment? So this slide is for you. What to do in terms of distant geographical locations and remote locations. All right. Let's take the distant locations first. And it's actually a wonderful question, whoever asked it. It has multiple implications on why we should take a distant location or not. Now, one thing you should be aware, when we deal with frauds, we're not dealing with good people. There is an element of danger involved. And when you talk about commodity-related frauds, the element of physical danger is high. We've seen multiple instances of what happened with people who investigated the sand mafia. We've seen what happened with engineers who went after the oil mafia. Then there is the coal mafia. So when you're dealing with commodity-related frauds, there is a real physical danger and you need to take precautions. Now, that's why I'm going to deal with this geographical location question on three fronts. One is what to do if it is remote. Then we use what we call is the standard of the chartered accountant, which is materiality. What is the reason I should go to the remote location? What do I need from there? If it is data, I can get it from anywhere in the country. Are there physical documents? Do you want to see something there on surprise? Do you think it is material to your investigation? If it is, and materiality does not come from value. For example, if you did a Benford or you ran an idea to get top exceptions and other things, and that location figures prominently, definitely it merits a visit. Now, that is from an investigation point of view. Second is from a safety point of view. Now, if it's a remote location and if it is distant, it's usually a smaller location, which means the person who is there is the whole and soul. So before you go there, you need to do some homework to understand if whatever has happened, could you have done it alone? Would you have got help from somewhere? Who are the possible people who would have helped? How do you conduct such an investigation safely? What precautions do you need to take? Do you need other people to come with you? Do you need support from any higher up in the organization? Do you need some kind of security? And things like that. So when you deal with a remote location, you have a lot of these. And the third thing I would always recommend, and this is not just for remote locations, never ever disclose what you're doing to the location you're visiting. For any location, it's a routine visit. It was picked up at random based on your sampling method. There's nothing in particular you're looking for. Collect the data, do the analysis, write what you want to write as a visit report after you have left the location. So don't discuss conclusions or opinions at the location. That if you're already scared, will constitute a larger physical risk. So it is a little hypocritical, but the work we do is such. We don't say everything which is in our mind. We do it when we are in a safe place. So hopefully that should answer your question. All right. Now, where all do you find opportunities? You find opportunities in multiple places: advertisements, tenders, empanelment. We talked of resolution professionals. When you attend self-development courses, when you grow your network, you would find people, and especially with a lot of these virtual courses the institute is doing or your local chapter is doing, you would be able to expand your network. There are always professionals who have more work than they can handle. So collaboration with other firms or other people is an automatic next step. Now, but there are still hurdles. What are the hurdles in getting work? Vishwanath ji, I don't know if he's there, but this is tending into his area. But since the question is specific about that, let's take an IBA empanelment. They have a turnover criteria, which is huge. They also want you to pay for empanelment. They also want you to have a specific number of branches. They also want a certain number of CISAs in the firm. They also have a minimum partner criteria. So for the person who is asking, how do we get into this? If you have to be empaneled, you must have a large firm. There's no way out. But there is ways to get work if you're not a large firm. For example, I am a sole proprietor. I don't have offices in 10 places. I don't have 5 partners in 5 major cities. So obviously, I do not qualify to be empaneled with SEBI. I am not qualified to be empaneled with banks or most of these places, but I still get work. Because like I said, some of the large firms look for people who will execute the work. They look for people with the skills of evidence gathering, with an understanding of related laws, with an understanding of the industry, with the capability to draft the reports right, to manage their teams and guide them. So that is the role which I have chosen. Now, this is an individual choice. And I have a sympathy for the people who don't want to increase the size of their firm. One, they want to keep their name in the firm, I guess, like I do. But if you don't have such things, it's fairly simple to form a large firm today. The only advice I would give you while forming large firms is don't form firms with your friends. Don't form firms with based on relationships. Relationship is important, but if you target an IBM appointment, or if you target a SEBI appointment, look at the criteria. Look for firms in the cities they would prefer branches. Look for partners who can help you meet the turnover criteria. Look for people who are qualified enough to meet their qualification criteria. And make sure that everybody gains from this partnership. You might find a person with 3 crore turnover who meets your shortfall in turnover. But you need to be able to sell your firm or your proposed firm to them so that they understand what they will get if they become part of this larger group of individuals. The second thing we need to be able to do is to draft your agreement, and I think there are several of these available, so I will not go into them, on maintaining independence and yet being a collaborative firm. So with that, let's get into specific opportunities. One thing is you keep abreast of tenders. Tenders is the way most work comes, which means you need to see advertisements. Be in touch with firms in your city or seniors in your city who do this kind of work. We need to be known that we are doing this work, we'd like to do this work, and we are willing to help. The other large opportunity which we're talking about is from resolution professionals. Resolution professionals basically deal with IBC, in which case companies which are not able to meet their debts, which are getting bankrupt, they come under a resolution professional who then decides what can be done best. And the resolution professional usually comes in when restructuring and all other attempts with the promoter have failed. So now he's trying to find a way forward by selling what is there to recover the dues and pay what is called the creditors of that company. So, which means basically he's putting the company up for sale. So there's a huge opportunity in resolution professionals in terms of that they will want a forensic professional to review what has happened. And they have very specific requirements as per the IBC Act. I'm sure Mr. Vishwanath will cover some of that. In essentials, they want a specific transactional audit, which means separately they want transactions reviewed with sections of the IBC. So that's an opportunity. The other question I get, I don't see it here. Madam, is there any other question? Other
No,
than
sir.
the initial few you put? Okay.
No,
The
sir.
other question I get is we are all small firms. So we are not going to get forensic opportunities from our proprietors. You will. I've got opportunities from small proprietors we have worked for. I think you need, what we need to do as a profession is to explain to them the cost of lack of control, explain to them the risk which we have if we don't attend these things, look at their business and don't present it to them as compliance, present it as a value proposition. When we do their accounts, when we do their returns, we get a very close look at what is happening. A lot of what we do can come from that. The other opportunity for us as practicing professionals in a regular practice, when you do, for example, something as simple as the concurrent audit of a bank, you have access to almost the entire transactions of that branch. That is a huge opportunity for you to identify possible areas where your forensic expertise can come into play. When you do the concurrent audit, you have complete transactional access, which is even more than what we get as a forensic professional. You can take transactions, do analysis, look at multiple things, think out of the box. How long did it take for a loan to be approved? Are some loans approved faster than others? Do some people approve more than others? Some people never approve at all. Are loans approved near the threshold? Look at related companies with the same bank. Is there any pattern? Are large loans given after smaller loans are repaid? These are all ways you can pitch, even doing your regular work, to understand if things are going wrong, and then word it suitably. Now, the only thing we need to be careful is don't go to ask for the opportunity to the person who may be behind the fraud. So that is something you need to take care in terms of going to the appropriate level before actually asking for the opportunity. The other thing we want to clarify before closing is that the institute has, let's go back to the standards for a minute. The standards are called FAIS, which is Forensic Accounting and Investigation Standards. So there is a word missing here. It's a word which everybody relates to when we talk of forensics. The word is audit. Now, the institute is consciously moving away from the word audit and using the word investigation. It's a very, very important distinction. And we're doing this from basically 3 or 4 points of view. First point of view. When we come and look at the books of account as a statutory auditor, we are primarily giving our opinion on the financial statements. We are expressing our opinion on the adequacy of internal controls, whether they are commensurate with the size and nature of the organization, and whether they are operating effectively. The third thing we are doing is to confirm that whether we have reason to believe that any fraud is being conducted by employees of the company. So that's again, whether in the course of our statutory audit, did we find anything? So the mandate in statutory is a reasonable assurance. It's not definitive. We use samples to be able to cover the large portion of transactions, for example. The evidence we look for is more persuasive. So it's not appropriate to charge a statutory auditor for not discovering a fraud, because the tools and techniques used to uncover frauds are completely different. The statutory audit looks at persuasive evidence. We look at conclusive evidence. To give you a very theoretical, but I will make it simple with a practical example. One of the things they did when doing the fraud investigation in Satyam to identify where the fictitious employees came from was they actually looked at Satyam employees who didn't go on tour. They looked at Satyam employees who never claimed reimbursement. Satyam is basically an IT company. Most of their employees work in client sites. A lot of them go abroad on tour, or at least to other locations in India. So a lot of them get baggage allowances, winter allowances, depending on where they're posted. So what they did was they looked at all the employees who did not take some of these allowances. Based on that list, they investigated further and found that a lot of them didn't exist. Now, this is not something which a statutory auditor would do in the normal course of his work. So what we are trying to do is distinguish between the work of an auditor and an investigator. And what the institute is trying to do is to make it a completely different discipline of work, wherein it comes up as a new area of opportunity. So that is a step which is taken by the institute to make this a forensic investigation discipline rather than a part of audit. But there's a large change management related activity involved where the institute will do a lot, but we expect lots of our friends and colleagues, like those of you attending here, to also, when you go out and meet and discuss in professional forums, come to distinguish the word audit and investigation. Definitely, as a profession, if in the normal course of statutory audit, things were seen like stock shortages, issues in balance confirmation, significant weaknesses in internal controls, occasions to show that the controls were not operating effectively, and these were not highlighted and investigated further or recommended for further investigation, definitely the statutory auditor is at fault. But if the expectation is that he did not do things like the examples I showed you, like if I do a forensic investigation, I would look at things like trip times. Can a truck go and come back in this time? Can we run a factory at this level for so long to gain this production? If the factory was idle for this long, do the other parameters like electrical consumption, check post figures, weighbridge figures tell the same story? These are things I do. I go and compare commodity price exchange in commodity prices with the prices the company is getting for its products as raw material or what it is selling. These are what we do in the forensic domain. We actually run a Benford. And one more thing, since there was a Benford question, Benford's law does not apply when the numbers are artificially generated. For example, invoice numbers, anything where numbering is continuous, anything where there are ranges, because Benford applies to randomly occurring numbers. It doesn't come when there is some manual intervention before the numbers are actually entered. So we do all these things. A statutory auditor is not expected to do these things. We talk to vendors, we talk to employees, we talk to customers, we talk to lenders. So we have a much wider scope because we're supposed to give you a conclusion. We are supposed to give you evidence which will stand the test of a court. We're supposed to give you a report which you can use if you require to go to court. So the objectives of an investigation and an audit are completely different. So we should go out into the world to explain this to people, and that there's a different discipline. So don't expect that when you give an assignment for a statutory audit or something, they are going to also do a forensic discipline. It's a different discipline. I think that's about what I wanted to cover. And if there's anything else, I'm happy to take questions. And Vishwanathji, I hope I have tried to stay away from challenges, except that where they relate to the opportunities. But in execution, there are a whole lot of challenges, which I'm sure Vishwanathji would cover.
Thank you, sir. You made my life easier as well as tougher. Let me put it that way. Succeeding you in this session is not an easy job. Let me try my best. Thank you.
Yeah, and Vishwanathji, I've seen you after a very long time. Very nice to see you.
Nice of you, sir. Thank you. Same here.
And hopefully now virtual is over. One day we will all meet physically also.
Absolutely. Look forward for that.
Yeah, madam. Any questions? Anything else?
No, sir, not as of now. Participants, do you have any question? Please put it in the question
I will
bank
be there
link.
for another 10 minutes when Vishwanathji is there. So if there's any questions, if they come up, I will take them.
Sure.
Otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much,
And thank
sir,
you so many, all of you, for sparing your time.
Yeah. Perfect. Sir, I have to give you a quick vote of thanks because I'm sure the participants have learned a lot today, starting from the description of what fraud would actually mean, from the scope of the auditor to Benford, then talking about the Satyam, and the most important of all is how can we, one chartered accountant or the professional practice, get network and get more clients. So thank you so much for your time. And now we move on to the next speaker for today, CA Vishwanand Kochi. Thank you so much for taking our time for us. He holds 20 years of experience in risk management, internal audit, forensics, and consulting. He's the Executive Council of Institute of Internal Auditors and Joint Secretary too. He's also a senior faculty for the forensic accounting and fraud detection for the Institute. He finds passion in giving and serving to the society, and that's the reason why he is an active knowledge partner and has conducted various master classes. Today, he will throw light on opportunities in the fraud investigation, and we're so happy to have you here, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for that nice introduction. A quick check. Hope my presentation is visible on the screen.
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. Appreciate your interest as well as time. This what I thought this slide resembles what we wanted to do in forensics. Challenges pose opportunities. Opportunities come with bundle of challenges. So you can't take them one at a time. They come together as a bundle. So risks and rewards are always together. You need to take your risks so that you are rewarded, and to aspire for rewards, you need to be a risk-prone professional. Like what Saileshji aptly mentioned in a couple of examples. He said that opportunities don't happen, you need to create. He has given beautiful examples like in bank audit, the loans disbursement, like these small loans getting closed and immediately larger loans are sanctioned. The timing, he also touched based on the favoritism. So that's where when the going gets tough, only the tough gets going. So we being chartered accountants, as our motto, Ayeshu Supteshu Jagrati. So that's where we, the FAFD professionals, step forward to differentiate our services, the skill set, our knowledge, and the ability to implement and become the partner to the nation building in the financial economy aspect. So my talk today is based on the theme, aware, adapt, and achieve. So we should be aware of the we are aware of the opportunities. We should be aware of the challenges. We need to upskill ourselves. There's the adapt that enables us to achieve what we aspire to. And these three concepts are taken into different touch points. How these financial transactions are becoming weapons of mass destruction in today's economic world. What are the expectations from the forensic accounting? And where we stand as auditors, be it internal auditor or be it statutory auditor, the current status across the globe, which is based on some global research by ACFE and IAA, and the root cause analysis for learning points from the current status to move forward. On the skilling part, what it takes to be a forensic accountant to be successful and effective. That comes with underlying aspects of how fraud happens. What is a white collar crime? How do we fight the fraud from both organization perspective as well as individualistic perspectives? That takes us to the ultimate aspect of achieving what we desire and aspire for. There is a concept NPS, neurology, psychology, and sociology. The science aspect of this beautiful art of forensics. How do you blend the science with art so that the human element of collusion and persuasion can be pierced through behind the transactions to enable us to see through? And what kind of strategies, skills, and approaches we need to build and adopt in terms of achieving this, and also the skill of mastering the interviewing. Lastly, what kind of approach we should adopt and what kind of regulatory guidance that is available for us. Like Suresh Kaushikji mentioned, he has talked about the standards. Nandaji also mentioned that we are the first institute that we have come up with the standards. Besides and beyond these standards, what is the other international guidance we are having to deliver better job as forensic accountant, and not only as forensic accountant, but also as internal auditor and statutory auditors. Look at this quite contrasting slide, but with great similarity between. somebody with AK-47. Most of us are familiar for wrong reason with this guy Kasab, who is called as blue collar criminal. But you look at the other pictures which are very familiar. And Kaushikji has started with that first slide, the global economy, the GDP, how the GDP gets eroded because of these criminals who are called as white collar criminals. And we are expected to fight with this white collar crime to protect the economy. That's where the weapons of mass destruction in terms of deceit, concealment, and violation of trust. The bank loans is a best example for the violation of trust. So the expectations from forensic accountant, there are 5. Identification and confirmation of the fraud, if it is existing, and identifying the wrongdoer, the person behind the crime. It is not only the crime, but also the criminal. That's a differentiation between the audit to the fraudit. In audit, we talk about the process, but in fraudit, say for example, the forensic investigation, for simplification, let us call it as a fraudit because we are auditors by DNA, but we are upskilling ourselves into the fraud area, fraud domain, fighting the fraud. So let's simplify it as fraudit. For this closed door conversation, there is no sanctity for it. That demands identifying the person behind the crime. That takes to the impact assessment in terms of monetary aspect and collecting the evidences as admissible in legal proceedings, which is again a differentiator for us as an auditor. We seldom look at the legal proceedings. Generally, we stop at the peer review level maximum, unless otherwise there may be exceptions in certain cases where we are subjected to the legal proceedings as well, our work papers. But barring those exceptional items, generally it is not expected as an auditor to consider the legal requirements while we collect the documentary evidences. But here, the evidence in fraudit need not be confined only to the documentation, but any evidential matter. That's how it is defined. Then last but not the least, identify the control weaknesses because of which this fraud was a possibility, has become a possibility, and advise for corrective action. So we should be aware of the legal framework within which we could confirm the fraud, the admissibility of evidence in compliance of the Evidence Act of India, or the respective law of land where this case you are taking up in respect of cross-border crimes or engagements, information technology in terms of the jurisdiction, as well as the electronic evidences. Chain of custody is one aspect Shishir Kaushikji has touched upon. Valuation of fraudulent transactions or assets, that's where your asset tracing also becomes a big area of practice. Digital forensics is another practice line within the forensics. The third and fourth are sub areas within the forensics practice. Then the global technology threat and limitations of law, where Shishir Kaushikji also touched upon the IT professionals are one of the competitors because the IT is no more a separate line item in your business. It is worth mentioning here, business crime is always a matter of domestic law. So you should be aware of the law of land wherever you are doing this. So what is the current status of detection of this fraud? If you see, the tip has been the highest. Almost like 50% of the cases are only because of the tip. Precisely it was 45% when I have prepared this slide, followed by management review, which is detecting almost like close to 20%. Then internal audit, not very far behind, but that is also close to 17 to 20%. So internal auditors are contributing better as compared to the statutory audit, where you could see the external auditor is able to do it only at 1% of the cases. So this is not good enough when it comes to the review which was performed, and they also identified what was the root cause analysis, why the auditors are failing to detect fraud in a better ratio. So these are the root cause analysis results as per the global survey. They say the business environment is becoming very dynamic, lack of expertise in audit committees to guide auditors. So it is forget about the auditors. The audit committee members themselves are not keeping abreast, which is becoming a major challenge at the macro level. Followed by the lack of independence, which is the free hand. Like Prachi mentioning, auditor is always seen like a watchdog, not a blood hunt. So whether the auditor is given a free hand to do what is required. Followed by the involvement of top management in fraudulent and corruption acts by themselves, which is the management override the biggest threat and risk. The third one is lapses in the follow-up action by the concerned authorities, be it regulators or the authorities. The follow-up is lacking. Social engineering skills and techniques by the fraudsters by themselves. So this is a great skill that they exhibit. They think ahead of time and they make you to think the way they want you to follow so that your attention is diverted from the area of concern. The next point is touch based in some respect by Sushil Kaushik ji, that work around scope and materiality. So much bogged down to materiality and also limiting to the scope rather than going beyond wherever it is demanded, the situation demands, was also found to be one of the root cause. Then last but not the least, less equipped with the latest audit tools, reliance on internal controls, reliance on sampling, more dependency on junior staff at the execution level. Audit execution level is also not enabling the auditors to detect fraud at a better rate. First, you are not a welcome guest. As you may be welcome, you give the data requirement letter, but here you need to identify what is required and where it is available, how to collect, and it is your job. You are not a welcome guest in their house. So the crime and criminality is ever evolving with the advent of technology. Whether you are taking a lead role or a support role, like you may be engaged by the enforcement directorate or economic offences wing, CAD, or the other regulators, whether you are doing a support role, then what kind of responsibilities and free hand you will have to play a role. You need to be very clear. The mindset, our own mindset as an auditor, needs significant change. We will also see that in a couple of minutes. Skepticism is a big bet. Earlier, we used to take the information on the face of it and we rely that the people are good and they followed the process and the information which is given to you is proper and genuine. But here you need to verify before you believe and you accept, which is a big bet. Sometimes it can go wrong. Garbage in, garbage out. You may miss the critical point only at the time of inception of the information itself. Predication is another big challenge. You need to be very clear and convinced in the whole sum, given the situation and circumstances, there is a fit case for investigation rather than jumping into an engagement as an opportunity for us to build the business, which is the primary requirement as a forensic accountant, which is a big challenge as compared to the auditing profession, which we are not exposed or experienced earlier. In the regard, what we have seen already earlier, international survey says the auditors are lagging behind in their skill set and they are unable to detect fraud or prevent that, help organizations to prevent. The peculiar aspect about the forensics is the human element. In audit, we always talk about document, we always talk about the process. But here we talk about people who had done this, how he was able to do it. Was it he alone, he or she, he includes she, or there are accomplices, whether it is one bad apple or a bunch of bad apples as a bushel, or the entire organization is damaged. Then we also need to be aware of the societal impact on the human beings, be it as an employee or a vendor or a third party or a service provider, whoever either directly or indirectly connected, including those who are charged with governance in an organization. Like the transactional review, what Shishir Kaushikji was saying, this is data-driven, data-oriented organizations which are being built, like your e-commerce. The data literacy is the new English language. Unless you are well familiar and comfortable with handling huge chunks of data, the existence itself is challenged. Forget about the growth. Then sourcing the opportunities is one challenge, but needless to say, execution is a very deeper challenge than sourcing. Like if you are talented, if you are skillful, work comes to you, searching for you. But the execution, which is skill-based, it is a very scarce skill, and the resources sourcing is becoming day by day a big challenge. So executional responsibility for a qualitative deliverable is becoming a nightmare. So that's a big challenge. We should be very clear. It starts right from the data identification, what kind of data I should search for and where to search for, how do I collect, what kind of tools and techniques, like what Kaushikji was saying, relative size factor, Benford law, Altman Z score, M score, what kind of model I should use. And next comes your data analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to see how the data is analyzed and synthesized for going into the micro level details for presenting macro level picture. You tell facts, but you sell stories. That's what it is about the data analysis and synthesizing skills. Your story should be based on facts. So you should tell facts, but you should sell stories. The last two challenges, which are very critical, realizing your remuneration, the agreed fee, depends on the client satisfaction, because the outcome is not guaranteed in a forensic engagement. Even your failure should be appreciated if you couldn't find and conclude the engagement, because you can't guarantee 100% like in an audit. You could give a clean report or a qualified or a with subject to your reservations. Adverse opinion also you can give. But in a forensic engagement, if you give a disclaimer, I'm not in a position to conclude whether there was a fraud or not, that doesn't give any satisfaction to the client, whereby your conclusion of the report itself may not be accepted. Then what happens to you? Not only your remuneration, but also your reputation. So that's a major risk when it comes to the forensic engagements. We should be aware of it, and we should be well prepared for that. Last but not the least, very prominent is legal liability. Somebody who is not happy with your report and feel hurt can file a demurrage case, a suit on you in your personal capacity. What kind of protection you will take while you issue the report and while you accept the engagement. These are various challenges that you need to be aware so that you adapt with the right skill set. Finally, we all know about Ramayana days. The impersonation started as the humanity knows. Ravana has impersonated, Hanuman impersonated for various reasons, good and otherwise. You look at Mahabharata, the greed starts with Mahabharata. The entire Kauravas got wiped off. You look at Satyam and Ran in today's world. So be it Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, fraud remains fraud. So it goes back to that back into history. But if you want a contemporary reading which is in a printed material, you could take Kautilya's Arthashastra, which is about 1700 years back written. He identifies 40 types of frauds and what kind of punishments should be given to each type of fraud. That brings us to a broad comparison between audit and fraudit, where the approach from documentation to data beyond the documents, the orientation itself changes. The documentary checking becomes a reality checking. Reliable in evidence becomes a solid proof. The demand is completely changed. We render opinion based on evidence in audit, but even a proof-based catching the red-handed may not be tenable and sustainable in court of law in the fraudit. It's complete 180 degrees difference between audit and fraudit in terms of the evidence. Then your responsibility is discharged when your work papers show diligence and your opinion is acceptable to the management or your peer reviewer or the regulator in audit. Whereas in fraudit, it goes all to the court of law as per the judicial pronouncements. Logic and reasonable assurance are the requirements in audit, but imagination and intuition are the drivers in fraudit. So in addition to the traits what we have as auditors, we also need to be having two more additional qualities. We need to develop them in fraudit, which are absolute clear thinking and open-mindedness. Even at the 99th percentage, you should not conclude a report under forensic engagement. You should go back, revisit, and you be reconfirming to yourself that you have not missed something or you have not added something which is not relevant. Always please remember, as I mentioned, fraudster has the ability to make you think the way he wants. He has the art of distracting you from the areas of concern. Now we are all familiar with the risk management and also familiar with the risk response strategies. A quick question, is fraud a risk? Do you agree? How many of you agree? Yeah, fraud is a risk. How many of you do not agree? Let me also open the chart. Any response? Hope I am audible, first of all.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Thanks, Prachi.
We're just waiting for everyone to respond.
How many of you agree or disagree? Fraud is risk. Okay. We all believe fraud is risk. Yeah, in its pure parlance, in the general definition of risk, yes, because it is an event which hinders when it occurs, if at all it occurs, it hinders achieving the objective. Hence, it is risk. But what is the difference? In risk, you do so many risk response strategies. You start with avoidance. For example, do not engage child labor. Or you mitigate or reduce depending on the threshold and the risk appetite by implementing controls. Then you transfer buying an insurance policy, for example, cash in burglary insurance or cash in transit insurance. After that, you accept, I'm okay with this level of risk still being happening. But when it comes to the fraud, can we define the threshold? Above this much amount, I am concerned. Below this much amount, if fraud happens, I am okay. Can anybody say, or did you come across anybody saying this? Even for that matter, a lakh of rupees, 1,000 rupees, whatever amount. I am okay my family members doing some fraud below 100 rupees, or my office members doing some fraud below 100 rupees. Is it acceptable for us? Largely no. The reason is fraud is an emotional factor. Hence, the challenge becomes multiplied when it comes to your conclusion. So it's a double-edged sword. While it carries all the characteristics and the nature to qualify as a risk element, but in the emotional factor, when it comes, there is no tolerance. Mostly it goes towards the zero tolerance. So what do we need to do as auditors? So Albert Einstein says, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We as statutory auditors didn't detect fraud very effectively is what the global survey says. And we are reasonably okay, about 17% of detection as internal auditors. And those who charge with governance, they are not happy with that percentage. So the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Hence, we as auditors, the role of a chartered accountant starts with transforming our thinking. To become an effective investigator or forensic accountant, we need to master these 4 domains. If you look at these 4 domains in the anti-clockwise direction, starting from the bottom from my right, it starts with accounting, we are champions. It moves on to the investigative auditing. We know the auditing and we believe people are good, the processes are established, designed effectively and implemented as designed and operating effectively. But here it is investigative auditing where we start with suspicion or suspecting something is going fishy and not all right. So we need to change to that extent. In this domain of auditing, it becomes a specialized field, the investigative auditing. Then move on to law. It is not only the company law or MRTP law. We are talking about the Indian Evidence Act. We are talking about Indian Penal Code. We are talking about Criminal Procedure Code of India. So all these things, your Information Technology Act, cyber laws, all these which make your evidential matter admissible in the court of law is a new gamut, and we need to upskill ourselves. Last but most important is criminology. In our life, unless otherwise somebody is very personally interested, there was no opportunity for us to specifically read through behavioral science, how a human being behaves under different situations and circumstances, how human brain functions under stress, under pressure. We may know that by experience, by feelings, but we have not undergone a structural education so far as part of our curriculum. But in forensics, we need to deal with people, we need to gauge their mind, and we need to understand whether what they say is a lip service or it is coming from the deep from their heart. Can I place reliance on what he is saying, or he is trying to deceive me? Is he putting me on the wrong track, or he is helping me to continue on the right track? How do I gauge that? That's this art and skill of interviewing. That's why it is called art and science of interviewing. That one domain where we do not have structural education so far, we need to start and invest ourselves so that we become very effective forensic accountant, which is the greatest challenge for me so far this engagement and field of service is concerned. A person who could handle these 4 domains either by himself or through the team could be his own office or those who are associated with him, they could be successful forensic accountants. So what is it calls for? It calls for specialized knowledge and investigative skills to collect, analyze, and evaluate evidential matter and interpret and communicate findings in the courtroom. As auditors, we draw inference. even in our income tax and indirect tax matters, we draw inference from the provisions. But here we need to interpret the situation, circumstances which are beyond the documentation, which are beyond the internal to the organization. So we need to be very careful and equipped with this specialized knowledge and investigative skills. This is the largest challenge as far as forensic accounting is concerned, investigation. This slide talks about how crime is changing its ways and means of being committed by criminals. The crime is not changing, crime remains the same, but the tools which are used to commit the crime are significantly changing, where you could see everywhere it is technology and the internet. So it is either using the computer, through the computer, or by the computer. So the crime, while it remains the same, the ways and means in which the crime is being committed is completely getting changed. This is the other aspect which poses significant challenge for chartered accountants, and we should be computer literate and data literate. This is again report to the nation, which is a global survey which conducted. If you see, when they analyzed the globally reported frauds, the root cause analysis says 33% of frauds were occurring for lack of internal controls. That is 1/3, the significant chunk. Then lack of management review followed, 21%. Then override of existing controls, which is the management override, almost like 20%. Poor tone at the top is 9%. If you see, all other unknown factors are only 4%. That means fraud could be well controlled if there is an intent, designed and implemented, monitored effectively for its effective use implementation on a regular and continuous basis. So this is where the chartered accountants have a significant role to play as anti-fraud specialists, either to prevent the fraud or to detect the fraud. Because 33%, if you count all the left side, they are either directly or indirectly connected with the internal controls. And we, being chartered accountants, are expected to be masters and champions of internal controls. So the recurrence of fraud is happening mainly because of two reasons. One, there is a misplaced trust, and there is a fear of reporting to the regulators because of the bad reputation in the market and the cost and the time that is involved. As Sushil Kaushik ji is saying, it goes on for 2 to 3 decades in India for a case to get decided. So the fear of time and cost involved, as well as the bad reputation in the market, allows the organization, restricts the organization to report to the legal authorities, that allows the fraudster to walk like a new bridegroom from one home to the other and commit the fraud, which is the global trend as per the report. With the due respects to the audience, don't mistake my intentions of this, but I just wanted to simplify the concept, a complex concept. How all this could be possible while people know it is all bad thing, it is not good thing. It happens because of two reasons. It is like the positive node and negative node in the electricity supply. Unless these two nodes come together, there is no electric shock. Once they come together, there is a shock. So if fraud is a shock, it happens only when there are open vulnerabilities in the organization and there are ill-intended people, individuals in the organization. This ill intention could be for various reasons. One, because of their own childhood and the upbringing. We will also see how the human brain affects these individuals, any individual, and how that can be trained. And the organization, which is from the internal control perspective. If you see on the left side, an old-aged scavenger sitting under the street light in the night is mistaken as a unaccompanied asset, a woman, and this guy changes his colors on the face. So that is the ill intention. If you can make this guy look at the reality, he would never get attracted to make that lured to get into this fraudulent or negative thoughts. That comes with the training and awareness. And the vulnerability in the system is controlled if you improve your internal controls mechanism. This takes us to the psychology of white-collar crime as a perspective. Sutherland has defined this in 1983. He says a crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of his occupation is white-collar crime. For example, Satyam Ramalingarazu, who was sharing dais with both Bill Clinton and Bill Gates in India those days, was respected and given the high social status only because of his occupation as MD and chairman of Satyam those days. Why do good people do bad things? So there are philosophical, behavioral, and technical analysis, all three. The behavioral scientist says the root of altruism lies in empathy, because people lack on self-restraint and compassion. They lose the moral stances, which encourages them to commit fraud. That's the behavioral scientist theory. The philosophical perspective is that fraud is the daughter of greed. Mahatma Gandhi says the earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. That takes us to the technical analysis on the right side of the screen, where the fraud triangle, which was proposed by Donald Cressy, says there is a perceived pressure acts as a motivation or incentive for an individual to commit a fraud. Once that motivation becomes so strong within it, he looks for perceived opportunity. That's what we were talking about in the previous organization. This guy, he has the perceived pressure, then he is looking for the opportunity. If the organizational internal control mechanism is having that vulnerability, that's where he commits, he sees that perceived opportunity, then he starts justifying his action. This basic fundamental fraud triangle theory has been further elaborated and extended by Crow by adding two more dimensions, saying that competence by virtue of the education and the positional power gives the person arrogance, so that he doesn't even listen, even if somebody is cautioning him or her from restraining, from committing fraud. Is it a rule or principle? Can we go with the zero tolerance when we deal with fraud? While everybody says you should have zero tolerance, but is it possible? It may not be practical. Theoretically, while it is possible and recommended, in practical sense, it may not be possible, because no two humans think alike, or the same human brain doesn't think the same way under two different circumstances. For example, if you are in a rush to reach the income tax department, you may cross over the signal, even though you are a law-abiding individual. Prachi, that's a very good question. Thanks for asking that question. I think you asked me only 810. Yeah. How to detect fraud sumoto? I take the cue from where Sushil Kaushik ji has stopped. While the board generally orders for the fraud, how you could detect a fraud sumoto? If you are the concurrent auditor or the branch auditor or the central auditor of a particular bank, take the same example what he has given. There is no mandate for us to do all that analytics, but are they not our regular audit procedures? Can't it be part of our audit program? You look at your concurrent audit report, go back and see there is a reporting responsibility on the suspicious transaction report, STR. The branch manager has to submit the STR. You spend some time on the STR if there is a newly opened current account or savings account where the KYC norms and the business background of the depositor doesn't support or validate the huge transactions, the volume of money that is getting deposited and withdrawn in the SB account or current account. it could be a possible money laundering, and you could go behind that particular transaction to detect a big fraud. And you will be helping the nation by taking the anti-terrorist counterfeiting terrorism money laundering provision. Who knows? Hope that answers the question, Prachi. That example, a quick example.
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you for asking that question. So because you can't practically avoid it, while theoretically it is possible, it is always advisable to take this bulletproof mechanism. What a bulletproof does, it provides layers of protection. Because the value at risk is human life. Even if something happens, the human life should not be lost, is the philosophy behind the bulletproof jacket. Take the same thing, even if the first layer is compromised, the second layer is penetrated, the third layer should protect, at least the value is not totally gone or compromised. So you need to study about the organization at its culture level, compliance mechanism, then internal controls. Go back to the IFC, where we do the IFC and ICOFR as per the Companies Act. The institute also has given the guidance note. The entity level controls talk about the culture. There should be policies, there should be procedures, and how the operating effectiveness is tested throughout the year, so that even if something is compromised, it is not grossly compromising at the value at risk level. So we need to be very clear whether a particular risk is fundamental and inherent to any organization, or is it becoming situational and is it evolving? So that's where we need to be on top of the industry, on top of the company, then the individuals, and besides the systems and processes. All this as part of a chartered accountant, be it an internal auditor, statutory auditor, consulting. If you are designing the policies, you need to confine all this. You need to consider these factors. There is an iceberg theory of fraud. When your time permits, please go through that. There should be a slide on this. It says the apparent mass above the waterline, which are the structural things like your hierarchy or the access rights or the job descriptions, which are visible, are not very significant from the fraudit perspective, while they are very important from your audit perspective. But the norms and the behavioral aspects, which are invisible but very, very devastating factors, should be paid attention by the forensic accountant. If you change your audit program, tweak it a little to spend some time there. If somebody is not taking leave, you just go back to your contemporary auditing in the IPCC itself. It is so very clear. So the forensic is not completely different from audit, and auditor is not barred from doing these kind of tests. If somebody is not taking leave record, take the leave records and analyze. If somebody is not going on leaves, then that is a big red flag for you. Somebody leaves office very late is a big red flag for you. Particularly this particular employee is in a remote location, it's a very big red flag for you. Don't ignore them. You may not conclude that it is fraud, but you heighten your other audit procedures to validate whether it could lead to your fraud or whether you are missing something by not heightening your other audit procedures. This is what I was saying, NPS, where neurology, psychology, and sociology is being discussed. These three gentlemen talk about this. Sigmund Freud, the neurologist, he has the proponent of the psychoanalytics. Then Sutherland, we have seen him in the white collar crime. He is an American, and he has proposed differential association theory. Then B.F. Skinner, he spoke about free will psychology. He is also a kind of American. He says that sustainable results come when people take. These are the theories which I was talking about. The psychoanalytic theory, the differential association theory, and for sustainable change that you need to bring in a particular individual, the operant conditioning theory by Skinner. When your time permits, please go through this. These theories that will help you in understanding criminology particularly. This is how human evolution happens right from the childhood, the 3rd month to 6th month to 9th month. That's where mother spends a lot of time. They learn from imitating the mother. First, they start with observing, then imitating mother, then sharing and caring with their similar age people. All this was possible only because there is a almond-sized organ in our brain, which is called amygdala. That amygdala decides the center. You could see the big dot at the center. The big dot at the center means the person is introvert. He is not bothered about the fears and feelings of others. He is so close-minded, like the kasab. People may become kasabs or very hard-hearted people. But for people like Neerja Sharma or the people who sacrificed their lives in the Taj Palace incident, those will not have even a dot. Forget about the center of gravity for them. It's a big circle. For them, the entire society is theirs. So that is what is called the caring continuum. The caring continuum is so large for Neerja Sharma kind of people, but it will be so narrow for Kasab-like of people. How this is relevant for us as chartered accountant? If you are conducting an interview or you are doing an audit, if you are interacting with people, the person has no sensitivities about the other person's feelings. He is so rude, rudimentary. But it may be his nature, but you cannot ignore whether he is having any ulterior motive like this. Whether this guy could be one odd man who is present in the organization. That's how this becomes relevant, either as a forensic accountant or as an auditor in your normal course of audit or in the special engagement of audit. So you need to see whether the altruism, the empathy, whether the poor recognition for others' fears, all these are, if they are too extreme, then you need to see a word of caution here. Too good to believe is also a symptom of fraud. Now, having done this, how this one guy who is having this ulterior motive could influence others, because one individual may not be able to perpetrate fraud. Like Satyam Ramalingaraju had to have either CFO or the internal auditor or somebody. But the other people who may not be having this ulterior motive, how they are joining hands despite knowing it is not a good thing to do. That's where these people have the power of dissonance and persuasion. They persuade such kind of people and make them join hands with them. How they identify those kind of people? The psychology says there are 9 finite emotions for relationships and values. People who are having these 9 emotions, they try to see whether they value a relationship with them or not. If somebody is valuing relationship with Satyam Ramalingaraju those days, today it may be a different scenario. But those days, who is an S-boss kind of person, they try to promote them and put them in the critical position, like your competency in the Crow's fraud diamond and fraud pentagon, and they make them join them. They persuade, dissonate them so that they become one team. This becomes the person who is being persuaded will listen to them. They will not listen in the first instance. They also think through, right? There is a angel, there is a devil. So there will be a good consciousness advice from within, or there is a bad advice that also comes from within for each one of us. Under the same situation, we also go through this. Should I jump the signal? Should I not jump the signal? Oh, I may jump the signal this time because if I get late for the income tax hearing, my client will be unhappy. There may be a best judgment possibility. So I jump for this time, though I do not want to jump the signal, generally speaking. So there are 14 psychological such forces that make good people do bad things. And this is a finite set of 14 such items. This, if you extend it to the Maslow's theory of needs, he identifies 3 needs. People who are under the basic needs, psychological needs, and self-fulfillment needs. And he says it is a ladder. People do not jump one to reach the other. They come across and come over one over the other. This, if you also believe in the spirituality and if you are a person of meditation, there are 7 chakras in human body. It links with the evolution of human to that extent. That is linked with the Maslow theory. If you are getting this awareness, that what helps us in identifying whether you are talking to a right guy, what kind of information he is sharing with you, whether you will be able to rely, to what extent, to what degree you could rely on his information, you will see. Here, the thing is, you may not be able to do all this by your own, alone. So you need to build a team of people with different skill sets. There is a beautiful video on the YouTube for paucity of time. I'm not playing here. You just see the modern story of this hare and tortoise, how they change the rules of the game and they win as a team together. It is not a hare versus tortoise. It is nowadays, with the change of business models and the technology advancement, it is hare and the tortoise and the hare to win as a team. This is what we need to take as forensic accountants. It is not all for me or all for you. It is a sharing proposition between both of us in terms of the technicality and the professionality. So there is a well-proponent theory, be aware. So you need to define the roles and responsibilities of people who are involved in the engagement. And you need to inquire about why the incident was an exception. Let us be very, very clear. This is what Shishir Kaushikji was saying that time. Unless you prove the intent, it may be a mistake, it may be a gross negligence, but not fraud. So you need to be very clear whether it is an exception or a well-intended, well-directed, intended act or omission. How do you prove? You need to inquire and find out why the incident was an exception or was not an exception. For that, we need to have different skills and strategies. Before we proceed further, I just pause to check if any of you have any questions.
Let me check, sir.
Please.
No questions, sir. Only a compliment that the session is going fantastic and people are learning a lot.
Oh, thanks a lot, Prachi and everyone. Whoever, if this is of some use, this investment of time of yours is well paid and I'm honored. Thanks for that. So you need to have, everything starts with a strategy. Your goal is to find the missing link. So your goal can't be changed because it is going tough. You may need to change your strategy. So the strategy should be well thought of and well laid through. It should establish the facts, finding the perimeter, where to stop and where to cut. Then explore the depth, to what extent you can go. You see, that's where in one of the context, Sushilji was also saying, you need to know, you need to be safe. Of course, that has a different connotation, different context, but you need to also decide to what extent you want to go in deep analysis. Then you need to collate the weak links before you assess the impact. If you take this as the strategy, you also need to have the team with the relevant skills. The first and foremost is the inquisitiveness. The inquisitiveness is such a powerful thing that it helps you, enables you, and empowers you to have attention to details. My mentor and our vice chairman Ramki, he says, God lies in details, devil also lies in details. If you go into details, you will find God if you want, but if you do not go into such detail, the devil finds you. So we need to get into those details and you should be able to link things together. That's where earlier, if you see, we used the word data analysis and synthesis. So it is not only analysis, it is not only breaking things. It is also pulling things together and making things appear in a perspective. That's where you will find the pattern. You recognize the pattern, what is evolving. On its own, at a singular level, it may not give you the complete picture. But when you compare and correlate together two different things, again, Sushil Kaushik ji has given you an example. If inventory is piling up, there is no sales. Probably they are stocking for winter. Or he also said, if the sales is not going up and the inventory is also not in hand, but the consumption is high, what is happening there? So these pattern recognitions and linking of things will enables you to make a proper decision. And that's where your impact assessment will be much more authoritative and satisfactory to yourself in professional terms and quality aspect. At the same time, you can't differentiate, you can't isolate the digital forensics nowadays. So you should be digitally literal. You in the sense either as an individual or one of your team member, including your associate who is working for you in the engagement officially, subject to the confidentiality and disclosure to the client and acceptance. You need to identify which digital asset you need to go after and what kind of data and what kind of keywords you should search, and then review the outcomes to identify the red flags and evidences. These do not become themselves as evidences sometimes, but these will give you leads to go back and change your strategy if required. So that's how it becomes an input for changing your strategy and extend your procedures to find the right missing link or the main thing before you enter to the interview room. Interview is an art, but it is based on pure science. Let us be very clear. This is the art of interviewing based on science. How that helps? Interview in forensics is like a heart to the human body. Any organ may make the human body die, but heart failure is the ultimate. So interview is also like that. All those digital forensics, all those keyword searches, all those data analysis, all those document verification, everything is pulled together, linking those things, analyzing the patterns, only to ask relevant questions to the concerned people. The steps that we have discussed earlier, that becomes the input for the interviewing aspect. Now, the person who is sitting before you, now you need to judge the person. When I say judge, I need to be very cautious, and I need to also make you aware and caution you that the judgment is not the judgment what we are saying he is good or bad. It is in terms of how much weightage I can place on the words that he is saying, in terms of relying on the information what he is sharing at this point in time. Because the information is not one-time activity. The interviewing is not an interrogation. It is an information gathering process. So it is an interaction. It is an interaction between two individuals. It could be two or three. Three is not from the other side. Side should be only one. From your side, it could be two. Say, for example, if you listen everything, the human brain forgets 80% within 24 hours if you do not recapitulate the content. That's the research result. 80% is lost within 24 hours. Hence, it is important to capture as form of written document or as in the form of audio video recording. Of course, there are certain guidelines. You need to follow those things. Otherwise, it is not tenable in the court of law. Subject to those professional ethics and the requirements, you need to have another person accompanying you to help you in documenting or recording these conversations. Otherwise, you focus writing, and while you write, you will lose the eye contact with the other person. The other person may lose interest in talking to you, or he may get afraid and he stops talking with you. Both these scenarios will hamper the purpose of this interviewing, and we will be at the receiving end in terms of losing the intent and the purpose of the interviewing. Hence, we need to inform the other person, my colleague will assist me in terms of taking a notes while I am interacting with you. With that note, you need to start, and you need to gain confidence of that person. We were talking about these behavioral science, right? You need to start reading the behavioral science, what we were saying. At the same time, we also need to behave in very professional manner. We should be objective and fair and professional. Show courtesy and respect to the other individual. You never know whether he is only a suspect or he is the fraudster. Yes, Prachi. We can go ahead if you have some questions.
Yes, sir. So we've got some questions here. So basically, Yogi says that, sir, statutory auditors are normally given restricted time to complete the audit. Can you please share any specific technique used to identify fraud during the audit?
Perfect. Very valid question. Thanks for raising that. Take an example. Let's move out of banking, because banking has become too many examples so far. You are the statutory auditor, and you are having a limited time to complete the audit. How do you detect or identify fraud is the question. You are a manufacturing company, for example. You have the raw material purchase cost, and you have the goods sold, cost of goods sold, for consumption. Convert the financial values into quantity. How much material has been purchased, how much has been consumed, and you adjust for the opening stock and the closing stock. You have the general yield ratio, you apply the yield ratio, and you have the actual physical finished goods which is manufactured, which was the output, and now you have the consumption, and the financial value is now converted into quantity value. When you put the quantity value, you know whether the yield ratio is up or down. You adjust it for the abnormal events, if any. Say, for example, there was abnormal wastage which is recorded, or there was a machine failure where you lost one batch of good product. So your yield to that extent was not up to the mark. You adjust for that. Still, if there is a difference between your quantity purchased to the quantity consumed versus your finished goods, you are not spending so much of time, but bringing these factors together, doing a simple data analysis on quantities of raw material consumed versus procured versus in hand, you may detect if there is a procurement fraud. Does that answer? A simple example, you can extend this to anywhere.
Absolutely,
so that is where you need to collaborate the data points. You need to identify various data points. They are existing there, but you need to bring them for collaboration and analyze them for a better picture.
So there are two more questions. Can we take them now?
Yes, please, Prachi.
So it is bribing. This question is raised by Rajendra Thakur. Is bribing by the management as a norm of the industry be classified as fraud?
Great. I just deleted that slide before we started. Otherwise, there is a slide that I have. Again, you go back to report to the nations, whoever is interested. Google report to the nation by ACFE. They actually publish a report biannual once in 2 years, sorry, by industry, by sector, by size, by gender, by category. Beautiful analysis of reported frauds. That report to the nation identifies the fraud into three types. It is called fraud tree. One is the misappropriation of assets. The second one is fraudulent statements. The third one is corruption. Corruption is misuse of positional power which is lawfully vested for personal gain. Corruption is on demand side. The person who is, say for example, traffic inspector, you are not having driving license in your pocket. I am just giving an example. So he can demand some money to waive the lawful penalty so that you can get away with a very small pinch in terms of monetary value. As against 1,000 rupees, for example, he will charge you 200 rupees. He doesn't give you receipt, or he will give you receipt only for signal jump. Now, he is misusing his power, vested power, for personal gain of that 200 rupees. Okay. Now, you have given him another 200 rupees and you managed him not checking or asking you for driving for the vehicle registration certificate because you didn't pay for the road tax. So he didn't allow, he didn't conduct any checking on the further documents like your vehicle registration number or insurance or etc. Otherwise, your vehicle would have been confiscated. Now you are offering him, this is on the supply side, you are offering him money for misusing his vested positional power. This is what is bribe. So both corruption and bribe, which are on the demand and supply side in our economic terms, they are also a variant of fraud. Does that answer?
Yes, sir. The next question is, can the expertise in Excel help us in detection of fraud?
Absolutely. That's where the Benford law, Altman Z score, or even a simple relative size factor, these things. If you join the FAFD course, there will be 2-day session, if I remember correctly. You will be trained hands-on on Excel as well as ACL and IDEA. So you put these techniques using Excel to use on a large data set which is given by the respective faculty, and you can upskill yourself, which will surely help upskilling your fraud detection abilities in the normal audit or forensics, but surely it will help. If you are doing in Excel, I'll also suggest you also extend that to Power Query. You can Google or you can reach out to people who are practicing the Power Query. The Power Query, Power BI, or the next level to the Excel. If you are aiming to master Excel, you also can look at Power Query. Yes, please. Prachi?
No more questions, sir.
Okay. So we continue then. Thank you for
Yes,
keeping the session interactive and asking the questions. You can post your questions, whatever you have, whenever you have. So as professionals, now we are in the interview, we need to present ourselves. Give respect and take respect is the first law of Hinduism. Somebody told me when I was young lad. So it also applies for us. If you are expecting the other person to behave in a proper way and give you proper responses, which helps you in positively closing this engagement, you also need to be so courteous and so professional when you present yourself before the person. So you should be very clear and you should be objective and fair and professional, show courtesy and respect. And please observe non-threatening demeanor. You focus on information, don't play guessing games. Be thorough, but remain relevant. You can ask any number of questions. That's what we discussed earlier. Also, you should be very clear how deep you want to go in. Where to stop also should be known to you. It is not only how deep and how far you want to go. And all the more very important, be an active listener. Become a good listener to become a good speaker. So you need to be an active listener. So that encourages the other person to come openly and share whatever information he or she wants to share with you. They need to see a good friend in you and a good professional by your approach. And you also need to be an active observer. Why it is important? The observations. This slide talks about the observational power. There would this like a thief leaves some clues unknowingly, or a criminal leaves some clues unknowingly on the ground. That's why when the blue collar crime happens, first the clues team comes and they collect possible clues, evidences. Similarly, if he or she is a fraudster, there could be a high possibility that they leave some clues with you. You should be able to gather them by observation. But a serious word of caution is, some of these behavioral things could be a natural traits for those people. So you need to see whether something is natural to them by birth, or these are exhibits, are the symptoms which are exhibited by the fraudster because they are under some stress or fear. For example, if somebody is lying, it causes stress within them. This leads to involuntary verbal, non-verbal, and physical reactions. For example, somebody may have the nail biting as a habit. Somebody, when they come under stress, may bite their nails. Somebody may get sweat on their forehead. Somebody may tap their feet on the floor. Somebody may rub their hands, palms, left to right, right to left. Somebody may pause long for a particular type of question while they were so quick and responsive. Somebody may give a series of answers saying that I don't remember, even for a 5-month incident, while they were able to recollect even a decade back incident. So you should be able to observe under what circumstances, what kind of pattern is evolving. But how do you differentiate these, whether it is a natural trait or a behavioral point? That's where you need to have the ability. You should develop that behavioral science, and you need to have a set of questions which you are very well prepared. That's where we said you should be prepared, you should be thorough. So you need to have in your mind, it is not written on a piece of paper. You may write on a piece of paper, but you should not look at the piece of paper and ask question after question, expecting him to answer. So you need to follow a particular type of question and see whether he is tapping or not, whether he is getting sweat or not, whether he is biting his nails or not. The other set of questions, 1 or 2, you need to bring is suddenly there is a change. Go back to the previous set, he is not behaving like that. That means you could, over a period of time, may possibly observe for this particular type of questions, for this set of questions, there is a change in the behavior because this person is coming under stress. Is he or is she lying? If they are lying, that means the data point, what they earlier said, may be contradicting. Should I further investigate? So that's where you will heighten your audit procedure around that point. That's where we said it is an interactive session rather than an interrogation session. The interviewing is always an interaction. It is a two-way mutual conversation. Because it is a conversation, you should encourage the other person to talk more than you talk more. That helps you in gathering additional information and go back and do additional audit procedures so that you won't miss anything or leave anything. That's where interviewing is an iterative process. It's not one-time affair, as I said at the beginning. While you start the interviewing, you should introduce yourself. While you end the interviewing, you should thank him or her and also leave the room by a request. Can you please come back once again if I need additional information once I collate this? If I have any doubt, can I expect your extended cooperation? Can we meet once again? How many times you should say? All those many number of times till you get satisfaction from your repeated revisit of your own findings. So you need to observe these triggers to the behavior and build additional procedures. Then what type of questions you should ask? You should always encourage the other person is the motto of this interaction as we discussed. So the other person should be motivated because of this. The whole purpose of the interaction is to collate information, gathering additional information. So there should be informational questions, open questions. It should be leading questions. You should avoid to the extent possible closed questions. You should completely avoid double negative questions because they lead to confusion. You should never attempt attitude questions. Don't rub on the wrong side of the other person. Don't test the patience and ego of the other person. Once you follow all this and going through the iterations, once you are confirmed, once you are satisfied to yourself that this person is now ready to come out and accept and admit. Once you get to that level by yourself, that's where you need to play the trump card by taking the admission seeking questions, which will be your closure part of the interviewing. So always it starts with the informational questions, go through the open questions and leading questions, then you will end up with admission seeking questions. This way you will have the differentiate purposes and structuring your interviewing itself. Now, having seen at the beginning that the board is not happy, those charged with governance were giving not a healthy report of ability of auditors in terms of fraud detection. So how do we close this expectation gap? What changes we should bring? So build awareness and accord training to all the stakeholders. It should start from the audit committee members to your junior most staff in your office. Need for paradigm shift from our historical perspective of what happened to the future perspective of what if these trends continue through the present fact of where is the problem. That's what you need to see. So the pattern analysis, when we were talking about why this is happening, where is the problem lying? So you need to build an organization-specific profile of potential fraud because it is emotional factor and it is people-oriented. If it is a system, process and system-oriented, you can copy-paste and you can generalize. But because it is people-oriented, no two brains think alike in the same situation, and no single brain thinks alike under two different situations. There should be a book, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. If you are interested, please read that book. It's a research-oriented book on the human brain. If I remember, the 5th chapter is very interesting. It talks about why the human brain doesn't function in the same way, because of which kind of chemical reactions it behaves differently under different situations. So the book title is Emotional Intelligence. The author is Daniel Goleman. It should be somewhere around 350 rupees to 500 rupees, available on Amazon. So you should you should build that organization specific profile of these. While the fraud triangle, fraud diamond, fraud pentagon gives you the framework, you need to understand the people side of the organization to do this. Then use technology to demonstrate. Exercising due professional care and data analytics is one of the point what we discussed. Concentrate on follow up on issues identified. Don't leave them. Don't just report them. Do on yourself. That's where we said how far you want to go, how deep you want to go. It is in your hands. Expand the scope and repeat. Don't limit yourself to the minimum required as per the standards. Standards are only guidelines. They are not the highest demands. They are the bare minimum expectations from us, so that there is a diligence which can be demonstrated. But that is not the maximum. So ensure necessary and adequate independence and free from bias, not only in the structure, but also in your mindset. Be alert always. Identify red flags at early stage. Be trained to recognize warning signs. Somebody was saying Excel helps you in identifying these red flags. Combined with the other factors, they might indicate fraud. Who knows, you may be lucky on that day. So this is what I should say. The CATS, the FAFD course covers that. The last point on the left, what I mentioned, the read behavioral science more and more and more. So we as auditors, internal auditors, SAA 11, it talks about consideration of fraud in internal audit. So even if you are not doing the forensic engagement, you are mandated by SAA 11, if you are doing internal audit, that you consider all the three elements of the fraud triangle. And if you are doing statutory audit, SA 240 talks about the auditor's responsibility to consider fraud. Here, two of the three, rationalization is not considered, because rationalization is nothing but the justification. But from the organizational perspective, it says the misstatement arising from misappropriation of assets and arising from fraudulent financial reporting. These are the two types of fraud what I was talking about from the fraud tree of ACFE. If you go to the international parlance, go to the IAA, there is a framework called IPPF. There are standards, attribute standards and performance standards. Two of the attribute standards and three of the performance standards talk about the internal auditor's role, how the audit scope and the audit program should cover the fraud element, fraud risk element. Lastly, the SAS 99 guidance also is available for you to refer and see what kind of additional tests you need to factor in your audit scope and audit program. I am not going into the FAS given by the institute, which are covered extensively by Sushil Kaushik ji. So final thoughts. There is no one textbook method. Don't just imagine that a method which was helping you detecting fraud in a particular case would become handy for you in the other case. Because as I said, it is all dealing with people. If there is evidence which is available, that may be actually deceiving you. Unless otherwise you are lucky on that day and the fortune comes a big way to help you in making the documentary evidence readily available for you to detect the fraud. So if some document is available, always suspect that that is the professional skepticism. You may accept the document, but you need to test yourself and satisfied that you can rely on that. So don't take this as a guidance, whatever methods that are being prescribed in any textbooks, including the faculties and the other speakers. This is experience and knowledge which speaks, which was tested and given good results in a given circumstance and a particular situation. It may not hold good when the situation changed, because the person would not be the same, with the same mindset, even if the person remained the same. So you use different frameworks, think innovative, follow your intuition. Einstein again says, logic takes you from A to B, but intuition takes you from A to Z. Have patience, because it takes time. Don't rush to close your report and issue and bill. have patience and make the client part and party to your success as well as failure. Why it is important, how you can make him party to failure. Keep them abreast about your approach. Make them aware what kind of risks this engagement may pose, what kind of possibilities that for which this engagement may not be concluded the way it was expected. And even if it is not known at the beginning of the engagement, if you are finding any difficulties and there are new developments or the assumptions what you made at the time of agreeing on the scope, the situation is changed, you need to change your scope, or new limitations have come, documentary evidence is not available, you could not make a headway, or there is a non-cooperation. We also discussed that you are an unwanted guest in their house. So there will be huge non-cooperation. Subject to these, if there are any failures, keep your client updated then and there itself, rather than waiting till concluding the report and then going with a conclusion that you could not move forward, which leads to dissatisfaction. So the client should be aware what kind of risks he is taking by engaging a forensic professional, expecting a positive outcome the way he deserves from the engagement. So if the client knows all these risks, he becomes a part and he also becomes party to your failure. Though the engagement may become failure, but your efforts are appreciated and your professionalism is highly appreciated, and that what gives you the success. So patient may die, but the doctor is not penalized, right? In all the cases, because of the efforts, the doctor is still appreciated. This forensic engagement is no different in that parlance from a medical surgery. So let us take the inspiration and the learning from those typical cases. The doctor also can't do anything beyond some level, right? Similarly, a forensic engagement may not be concluded the way it should be, despite you put the best of your intentions and best of the abilities and skills for various internal as well as external reasons, not because of lack of your skill or intention. But the client should be aware. Once he is aware and party to your failure, that makes you successful. Last word of experience, perseverance space. So let's pursue this, and I wish you all the very best. I think I am not overshot. Wow, exactly 9 o'clock. Thanks for your patient hearing and very active participation. And Prachi, I appreciate for your intervention wherever there is a question. If there are further questions, I can spend a few more minutes in taking up the questions.
Thank you so much, sir. I did see one question. The corruption may not be intended because the intention is to follow law, but at times this industry norms to gift or bribe. Will that be an indication of fraud?
Whoever has asked the question, let us be very clear. The question itself, the last part is conflicting with itself. You are saying on one hand gift, on the other hand bribe. Gift is completely different from bribe. Bribe is with an intention to use the vested power to your personal gain. You wanted to, say for example, the person who has asked the question, imagine they have a 200 square meters land. As per the city planning norms, he could construct only ground plus 2 floors. He knows that the area is going to be commercially very significant in the future, and that part, the area where the land is situated, is going to be merged into the greater Delhi or greater Noida. Once that happens, he may not get the permission. Today it is in, say for example, Gram Panchayat or low-level local authority approval limits. He goes and gives 10 lakh rupees bribe to get one more floor permission. The other person is not demanding here. The planning officer is not demanding. He is not corrupt, but you are corrupting him by bribing because you wanted to gain from this transaction by getting one more floor permission. So you are bribing, it is not gift. On the other hand, you are getting Dasara and Diwali. As a courtesy, the practice is to offer a sweet box. That's what is gift, or a pen. But this is not diamond studded 10 lakh rupees pen. This is a pen which may be 1,000 rupees, which may be 200 rupees. That is the difference between the gift and the bribe. If you are doing your FAFD course in the last session on law, this is a very critical point when you are going through your FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act 1977 of US and UK Bribery Act. The difference, the gift, what you are saying, if it is an industry practice, that is what is called grease payment, which is permitted under US FCPA Act, which is not permitted under UK Bribery Act. And this is the whole concept. If you read the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which made 40 plus 9, 49 recommendations, which is the primary base for your Prevention of Money Laundering Act in India. So the whole concept is based on the same thing, corruption and bribe. If you are bribing, you are penalized. If you are gifting, the onus that the magnitude of the gift is not going to the bribe level. It is a customary and it is on the grease. What is grease? It just eases the functionality of the bearings of the wheel. It doesn't enhance the capacity and functionality of the life duration of the wheel. It just eases that rust and it eases the functionality of the wheel. So you don't apply 100 tons of grease. You apply 100 grams of grease. So the onus to prove that it is only in the nature of grease lies on the person, as per the FATF, UK, the FCPA, all these things. Hope that clarifies. So there is a subtle difference between gift and bribe. The intent behind is to follow the customary in terms of gift in a minuscule level. But when it comes to the bribe, the intention behind is to gain something out of it for your own personal benefit. Hence, you are parting with that money or item in kind, which is a bribe. That's the difference.
Thank you so much, sir. That's the only question that we had so far. A lot of people are thanking you for the immense knowledge that you've given us. There are a few key pointers that I have taken away, sir, and thank you for that. Apart from professional skepticism, the thought process, neuroscience, interview skills, and the most important, observing the body language. As we come to the end of the webinar, I want to thank you for being here, answering all the questions, and spending your time, valuable time with our participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prachi. Thanks to the entire DAB committee and the support staff and the participants, more particularly for their active participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we thank